students, welcome to Board of Intermediate Education, Andhra Pradesh. This is S. Seshkumari, Junior Lecturer in Zoology, currently working at Government Junior College, Siripuram, Guntur District. This is the video of the chapter, Breathing and Exchange of Gases, which is included in the first unit of Zoology second year intermediate syllabus. This is the fifth video of the chapter, Breathing and Exchange of Gases. In our former videos, we have mentioned the three main processes of respiration. They are breathing, exchange of gases and transport of gases, and learned the complete details of breathing also. So what is breathing? The movement of air into and out of lungs is called breathing. The movement of air into the lungs is called inspiration, and movement of air out of lungs to the exterior is called expiration or exhalation. What happens to the inhaled air in the lungs? How is this exhaled air formed in the body? ఈ విషయాలు ఆలోచిస్తే మనకు ఇన్హలేషన్కి ఎక్స్హలేషన్కి మధ్య మన బాడీలో ఏదో జరుగుతోంది అనే విషయం స్ఫురిస్తుంది. సో వాట్ ఈస్ టేకింగ్ ప్లేస్ ఇన్సైడ్ అవర్ బాడీ ఇన్ బిట్వీన్ ఇన్స్పిరేషన్ అండ్ ఎక్స్పిరేషన్? సో దీస్ టూ ప్రాసెసెస్ are taking place inside our body between inspiration and expiration. First one is exchange of gases. This process occurs next to breathing. Now we'll move on to the next process, that is exchange of gases. What is exchange? I'll remind you the meaning of exchange and how to use the word exchange in respiration. So exchange is the act of giving one thing and receiving another thing in return. Here generally exchange takes place between two persons or two places, and two materials are getting exchanged here. In case of respiration, the two gases those are getting exchanged are oxygen and carbon dioxide. Where do we find these exchange of gases inside our body? During breathing, oxygen-rich air enters the lungs. In human beings, gaseous exchange takes place at two regions. The first region is alveoli of lungs. The inspired air first reaches the lungs. Inside the lungs, many alveoli are present. So the air in the alveoli is the alveolar air. So in the alveoli, this exchange of gases occurs between alveolar air and blood. Chudandi. Blood lo unnatuvanti carbon dioxide. Now this carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli from the blood, and oxygen present in the alveolar air diffuses into the blood. So gaseous exchange takes place between alveolar air and blood. From the air, oxygen reaches the blood. From the blood, carbon dioxide enters the air. And second site of gaseous exchange is tissues. Oxygen-rich air is supplied to the organs. Inside the organs, many tissues are present. In the cells of the tissues, the cellular respiration takes place. Oxygen is utilized for the production of energy, and as byproduct of this oxidation of food materials, carbon dioxide is formed. Now the carbon dioxide present in the tissues, it diffuses into the blood, and oxygen carried by the blood, it diffuses into the cells. So exchange of gases takes place between the blood and tissues. Oxygen from the blood reaches the tissues, and carbon dioxide formed as a result of metabolism of food materials, that is internal respiration, that carbon dioxide from tissues reaches the blood. So this is the second site of gaseous exchange. At these two sites, in the alveoli and also in the tissues, this oxygen and carbon dioxide, these two respiratory gases, they are exchanged by the process of diffusion. The exchange of gases, it depends on many factors. These factors, they affect the rate of diffusion. So what are those factors? They are partial pressure or concentration gradient of the gases. Second one is solubility of the gases, the respiratory gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, and thickness of respiratory membrane, third factor, and fourth factor is surface area of diffusion. Fifth one is distance of diffusion. మనకి పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ గురించి తెలిసినప్పుడు మాత్రమే ఎక్స్చేంజ్ ఆఫ్ గ్యాసెస్ అనేది ఈజీగా అర్థమవుతుంది. What is partial pressure? The name lone undi part. Part ante total lo konta bhagam. So the pressure exerted by individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure. చూడండి మొత్తంలో ఒక్కొక్కళ్ళ కంట్రిబ్యూషన్ నే మనం పార్షియల్ అంటాం. ఎయిర్ ఈజ్ ఎ మిక్స్చర్ ఆఫ్ గ్యాసెస్. లుక్ ఎట్ దిస్ పిక్చర్. ఇది ఎయిర్ అనుకుంటే దిస్ ఇస్ మిక్స్చర్ ఆఫ్ గ్యాసెస్ లైక్ నైట్రోజన్, కార్బన్ డైఆక్సైడ్, ఆక్సిజన్, ఆర్గన్. మెనీ గ్యాసెస్ ఆర్ present in the air. So total air exerts a pressure that is represented as P total. And one gas, for example, if this is nitrogen, the pressure exerted by this gas A or nitrogen is represented as PA, that is known as partial pressure of A. So the pressure exerted by single gas in a mixture of gases is said to be partial pressure. Here the respiratory gases are oxygen and carbon dioxide. The partial pressure of oxygen is represented as PO2. Its value is 159 mmHg. We know the composition of air. In air, majority of the volume is occupied by the nitrogen, that is 78%. But that nitrogen is not useful to our body. We depend on oxygen for the production of energy, and its volumetric contribution is 21%. This 21% of oxygen, it exerts a pressure of 159 mmHg. Its percentage in the air into total pressure exerted by the air. Then we will get the partial pressure of oxygen, that is 159 millimeters of Hg. In the same way, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is represented as PCO2 and its value is 0.3 millimeters of Hg. The volumetric contribution of carbon dioxide is 0.03%. మనకి ఎయిర్లో కార్బన్ డైఆక్సైడ్ 0.03% ఉంటుంది. కానీ ఇది ఎగ్జర్ట్ చేసే పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ 0.3 millimeters of Hg. So the partial pressure of oxygen in the atmospheric air is 159 millimeters of mercury and partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 0.3 millimeters of mercury. Exchange of gases mainly depends on partial pressure gradient. The gases always tend to move from higher partial pressures to lower partial pressures. That means a particular gas, for example oxygen, moves from high PO2 region to low PO2 region, irrespective of the partial pressures or pressures of the other gases. So ఒక్కదాని మూమెంట్కి, ఒక గ్యాస్ మూమెంట్కి వేరే గ్యాసెస్ యొక్క వాల్యూమ్స్తో కానీ ప్రెషర్స్తో కానీ సంబంధం ఉండదు. ఒక పర్టిక్యులర్ గ్యాస్ దాని యొక్క పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ గ్రేడియంట్ని బట్టి అది మూవ్ అవుతూ ఉంటుంది. ఇఫ్ యూ అబ్జర్వ్ దిస్ టేబుల్, దీస్ ఆర్ ద పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్స్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ అండ్ కార్బన్ డైఆక్సైడ్. All these pressures are given in comparison to the pressure of the atmospheric air, that is 760 millimeters of Hg. దానిలో పార్ట్గా వీటిని ఎక్స్ప్రెస్ చేయడం జరిగింది. These are the two sites of gaseous exchange, alveoli and tissues. The data given in this table, it indicates the concentration gradient of oxygen and CO2. If you observe here, this indicates the concentration gradient of oxygen between the alveoli and blood. Here one more gradient of oxygen is present between the blood and tissues. This is oxygen partial pressure gradient present between the blood and tissues. So gradient ఉంది కాబట్టే ఆక్సిజన్ మూవ్మెంట్ జరుగుతుంది. ఇక్కడ ఆల్వియోలై లో ఉన్నటువంటి ఆక్సిజన్ బ్లడ్లోకి డిఫ్యూజ్ అవుతుంది. ఇక్కడ బ్లడ్లో ఉన్నటువంటి ఆక్సిజన్ టిష్యూస్లోకి డిఫ్యూజ్ అవుతుంది. సో పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ గ్రేడియంట్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ ఇన్ డిఫరెంట్ రీజియన్స్ ఆఫ్ ద బాడీ. Coming to the partial pressure gradient of carbon dioxide, we find this in opposite direction. This is partial pressure gradient of carbon dioxide between tissues and blood. Tissues లో ఎక్కువ ఉంటుంది కార్బన్ డైఆక్సైడ్, బ్లడ్ లో తక్కువ ఉంటుంది. సో టిష్యూస్ నుంచి బ్లడ్ లోకి ఎంటర్ అవుతుంది. One more gradient is present between the blood and alveoli. సో బ్లడ్ లో కార్బన్ డైఆక్సైడ్ ఎక్కువ ఉంటుంది కాబట్టి బ్లడ్ నుండి కార్బన్ డైఆక్సైడ్ ఆల్వియోలైలోకి పంపించబడి మనం ఆల్వియోలై లంగ్స్ నుండి బయటకు ఎక్స్హేల్ చేయడం జరుగుతుంది. దిస్ ఈజ్ అబౌట్ ద కాన్సంట్రేషన్ గ్రేడియంట్స్ ఆఫ్ carbon dioxide and oxygen. We have to observe one more point in this table. This is atmospheric air, this is alveolar air. Why are these two values different? Out of 500 ml of air, which we inhale during normal inspiration, which is known as tidal volume, it is only 350 ml of air reaching up to the alveoli. అంటే మనం టైడల్ వాల్యూమ్ 500 ml ఆఫ్ ఎయిర్ని ప్రతి బ్రెత్లోనూ లోపలికి తీసుకుంటున్నాం. మనం తీసుకునే ఎయిర్ 500 ml అయినప్పటికీ ఆల్వియోలైని రీచ్ అవుతున్న ఎయిర్ 350 ml మాత్రమే. What happens to the remaining 150 ml of air? This air remains in the respiratory tract or these tubes. After we exhale also, some air remains in these tubes and gaseous exchange taking place continuously in the lungs. అంటే మనకు ఎక్సలేషన్ టైంలో మనం ఎయిర్ని బయటకు వదులుతున్నప్పుడు కూడా మన లంగ్స్లో gaseous exchange జరుగుతూనే ఉంటుంది. That means when we inhale, this fresh air enters into the respiratory tract. It mixes with the air that is already present in the respiratory tract. The air in this respiratory tract, it has more CO2 and less O2. Why? Here, as a result of gaseous exchange, the oxygen present in the lungs is taken into the blood and carbon dioxide from the blood is released into the lungs. So that's why the air in the respiratory tract has less O2 and more CO2. So when this fresh air mixes with the inside air, which has more CO2 and less O2, the partial pressure changes. The partial pressure of the oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveolar air changes. The partial pressure of O2 in atmospheric air is 159 mmHg. As it mixes with the inside air, which has less O2, the overall pressure of O2 comes down to 104 millimeters of Hg. So PO2 of alveolar air is 104 mmHg. Same thing happens even in case of carbon dioxide, but in opposite direction. The atmospheric air which we inhale has less CO2, but when it mixes with the air present in our respiratory tract, which has more CO2, the PCO2 rises to 40 mmHg. That's why there are two values which we need to understand here. So atmospheric air low, partial pressures, alveolar air low, partial pressures, these two are different. Finally, the partial pressure of oxygen in atmospheric air is 159 and PO2 of alveolar air is 104 as the fresh air mixes with the inside air which has less O2. If we compare the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, the PCO2 of atmospheric air is 0.3 mmHg and of alveolar air is 40 mmHg. Why? The carbon dioxide from the tissues is released into the blood here. The PCO2 has raised from 0.3 to 40 mmHg. Next factor affecting the diffusion of gases is solubility. What is the relation between solubility and diffusion of gases? The basic requirement for diffusion of gases in respiratory system is the respiratory surface, the diffusion surface must be kept moist. Here the gases, they don't diffuse in the form of gases. First they get dissolved in the moisture and then they diffuse according to the partial pressure gradient. First ఈ మాయిశ్చర్లో గ్యాసెస్ కరిగి డిఫ్యూజ్ అవ్వడం జరుగుతుంది. అందుకని ఇక్కడ మాయిశ్చర్ అనేది బేసిక్ రిక్వైర్మెంట్. మాయిశ్చర్ బేసిక్ రిక్వైర్మెంట్ కాబట్టి ఆ మాయిశ్చర్లో ఈ గ్యాసెస్ సాల్యుబిలిటీ ఎంత ఉన్నది అనేది కూడా ఈ డిఫ్యూజన్ మీద ఎఫెక్ట్ చూపిస్తుంది. సో కార్బన్ డయాక్సైడ్ సాల్యుబిలిటీ ఇస్ 20 to 25 times హయ్యర్ దాన్ దట్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్. అంటే మాయిశ్చర్లో కార్బన్ డయాక్సైడ్ చాలా వేగంగా కరుగుతుంది, 20 to 25 times ఎక్కువ వేగంగా కరుగుతుంది ఆక్సిజన్ కంటే. This is alveolus. This is the blood flowing in the blood capillaries surrounding the alveolus. Here, from the blood, first carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveolar air. As its solubility is higher than that of oxygen, it is diffused first. Later, oxygen diffusion takes place. The amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher when compared to that of oxygen. 1 unit partial pressure difference ఉన్నప్పుడు కార్బన్ డయాక్సైడ్ డిఫ్యూజ్ అయ్యే అమౌంట్ ఆక్సిజన్ అమౌంట్ కంటే చాలా ఎక్కువ ఉంటుంది. దట్స్ వై కార్బన్ డయాక్సైడ్ డిఫ్యూజన్ ఈజ్ ఫాస్టర్. Next factor affecting the rate of diffusion is respiratory membrane or diffusion membrane. The barrier present between the alveolar air and blood flowing in the blood capillaries is the respiratory membrane. And this respiratory membrane is tri-layered. చూడండి, ఆల్వియోలస్లో ఉన్న ఎయిర్కి బ్లడ్ క్యాపిలరీస్లో ఫ్లో అవుతున్న బ్లడ్కి మధ్యలో ఈ రెస్పిరేటరీ మెంబ్రేన్ ఉంది. సో ఇక్కడ ఉన్నటువంటి ఆక్సిజన్ ఇక్కడికి డిఫ్యూజ్ అవ్వాలన్నా, బ్లడ్లో ఉన్న కార్బన్ డయాక్సైడ్ ఈ ఆల్వియోలార్ ఎయిర్లోకి చేరాలన్నా ఈ డిఫ్యూజన్ మెంబ్రేన్ ద్వారా పాస్ అవ్వాలి. సో దిస్ డిఫ్యూజన్ మెంబ్రేన్ ఈజ్ మేడప్ ఆఫ్ 3 layers. Those 3 layers are wall of the alveolus made up of single layer of squamous epithelium, and then the wall of the blood capillary, that is endothelium, and in between these 2 layers basement membrane. ఇక్కడ ఎన్లార్జ్ చేస్తున్నటువంటి డయాగ్రామ్ చూద్దాం. దిస్ ఈస్ ద ఎయిర్ ప్రజెంట్ ఇన్ ద alveoli. These are the gases, main gases, respiratory gases. This is the blood flowing in the blood capillary. ఇక్కడ ఉన్నటువంటి ఈ గ్యాసెస్ బ్లడ్లోకి డిఫ్యూజ్ అవ్వాలంటే దే హ్యావ్ టు పాస్ త్రూ దీస్ 3 layers. One is alveolar epithelium, middle one is basement membrane, and next one is endothelium of blood capillaries. So this is the respiratory membrane through which the respiratory gases must pass through for diffusion. Now let's understand how this gaseous exchange takes place at the 2 levels. It is the pulmonary artery that brings deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Deoxygenated blood ante it has little oxygen. As it is coming from the tissues, most of the oxygen is utilized in the tissues. సో ఎక్కువ ఆక్సిజన్ టిష్యూస్లో యూటిలైజ్ అయిపోతుంది కాబట్టి దానిలో ఆక్సిజన్ తక్కువగా ఉంటుంది. సో పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ in the pulmonary artery, in the blood of pulmonary artery is 40. So it is called deoxygenated blood. The partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolar air is 104 mmHg. We have already discussed this point. As there is difference in partial pressure, the difference is 104 minus 40. 64 mmHg difference is there in the partial pressure of oxygen. Due to this difference of 64 mmHg partial pressure difference, oxygen from the alveolar air diffuses into the blood flowing in the capillaries. Now, the partial pressure of the blood rises to 95 mmHg as the oxygen from the alveolar air diffuses into it. Now, this blood with partial pressure of oxygen 95 mmHg is termed as oxygenated blood. This oxygenated blood, now it is there in the lungs. So this is collected by pulmonary veins and it is carried to the heart for circulation. So pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood to the heart. The gaseous exchange in lungs is said to be pulmonary gas exchange. It is also known as external respiration. Look at the diagram. The inspired air entering into the alveoli. This is alveolus of lung, and the alveolar air has oxygen and carbon dioxide here. The partial pressures are mentioned. We already know the values of partial pressures of oxygen and carbon dioxide. This is the heart. In the right chambers of the heart there is deoxygenated blood, and in the left chambers there is oxygenated blood shown in red color, and deoxygenated blood is shown in blue color. The deoxygenated blood from the heart is carried by the pulmonary artery to the lungs. What is meant by deoxygenated blood? The blood with less oxygen, that is PO2 40, and has more carbon dioxide with PCO2 45 mmHg. It is called deoxygenated blood. When this deoxygenated blood reaches the alveolar region, exchange of gases takes place due to the partial pressure differences. Carbon dioxide from the blood, it diffuses out into the alveolar air as there is difference in partial pressure. In the blood it is 45, in the alveolar air it is 40. So carbon dioxide moves out of the blood into the alveolar air. Oxygen from this alveolar air diffuses into the blood. Now this blood is known as oxygenated blood. It has partial pressure of oxygen 95 and carbon dioxide partial pressure has come down to 40. Now the blood is termed as oxygenated blood. The oxygenated blood from the lungs is carried by the pulmonary veins to the heart region. This is pulmonary gas exchange or external respiration. Observe the flow of blood in the capillaries which are present around the alveoli. Now this is the cavity of the alveolus. Alveolar air is there which is rich in oxygen. In this blood, carbon dioxide is more. This is deoxygenated blood shown in blue color. Due to the difference in partial pressure, first carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveolar air as solubility of carbon dioxide is more than that of oxygen. And oxygen from the air diffuses into the blood. By absorbing that oxygen, these RBCs, they are turning to red color. So this is the exchange of gases in the alveoli. Coming to the second site of gaseous exchange, that is tissues. The gaseous exchange in the tissues is termed as systemic gas exchange or internal respiration. Here, from the left chambers of the heart, the oxygenated blood is carried to the tissues. Now this oxygenated blood is with PO2 95 mmHg and PCO2 40 mmHg. In the tissues, the partial pressure of oxygen is less as oxygen is utilized for cellular respiration. Tissues లో ఎనర్జీ ప్రొడక్షన్ కోసం ఆక్సిజన్ యూజ్ చేసుకోబడుతుంది కాబట్టి ఆక్సిజన్ పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ తక్కువగా ఉంటుంది. As a result of oxidation of food materials, carbon dioxide is produced. That's why carbon dioxide partial pressure is more. So when this oxygenated blood reaches the tissues, as the partial pressure of oxygen is more in this oxygenated blood, that oxygen, it diffuses into the tissues. And carbon dioxide from the tissues, it is diffused into the blood. Now, if you observe the partial pressures of O2 and CO2, the partial pressure of oxygen decreased to 40 mmHg and CO2 increased to 45 mmHg. Now this blood with more carbon dioxide and with less oxygen is termed as deoxygenated blood and it is carried to the left chambers of the heart. This is said to be systemic gas exchange taking place in the tissues region. Like this, exchange of gases occurs at two regions in the human body. First one is at the alveolar region, which is said to be pulmonary gas exchange, and second at the body tissues, it is said to be systemic gas exchange. This is about the exchange of gases, which is the second process of respiration. In our next class, we'll continue with the process transport of gases.